From Illinois Public Media, this is the 21st Show. I'm Brian Mackey. Many farms in Illinois and other states use pesticides to deal with weeds, bacteria, and more. Left unchecked, all of those can have a major effect on crop yields. There are federal and state regulations in place for using pesticides, but those are not stopping them from drifting well beyond the areas where they are applied, which can lead to wilting trees, dead plants in backyard gardens and other farms, and sometimes sick people. So for the first part of the show today, we're going to talk about that and the ongoing debate over whether and how to tighten regulations on those chemicals. Kim Erndt-Pitcher has been following all of this over the past several years. She is Director of Ecological Health at the Prairie Rivers Network, the Illinois affiliate of the National Wildlife Federation. Kim, welcome back to the 21st Show.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
Also with us, Katie Vandenberg, who lives in Tazewell County near Peoria. She and her family have firsthand experience with this. In the spring, she filed a complaint with the State Agriculture Department about pesticide drift at her daughter's school in Morton. The Ag Department has fined the farmer responsible $250,000 and revoked his pesticide applicator license, though he has appealed the penalty. Meanwhile, Katie has become an activist on this issue. Katie, welcome to you as well. Thanks for being here.
Thank you so much.
I should say we also reached out to the Illinois Farm Bureau and the Illinois Fertilizer and Chemical Association. Both have been opposed to legislation that would add requirements that farmers notify people when applying herbicide near a school or park. Unfortunately, neither of them had anyone available to join us today. We also reached out to Bayer, which owns Monsanto, the company behind herbicides like Roundup and dicamba. They, in turn, referred us to a national trade association for pesticide manufacturers. We reached out to them. We've not heard back as we go to air Thursday morning. That said, our phone lines are open if you want to join the conversation. Maybe you've noticed the effect of pesticide drift where you are. What did it look like? What did it smell like? Tell us more about your experiences by giving us a call at 800-222-9455. That's 800-222-9455. All right, Katie, I'm going to start with you. Just tell us a little bit more about how this got to be a personal issue for you.
Absolutely. I first learned about pesticide drift after we had purchased a little over 40 acres of land in central Illinois. I had noticed our oak leaves were curling, and in doing research on that, I realized that it was most likely due to herbicide drift. We're surrounded by corn and soybean fields, and so I learned a lot about that. As I was researching it, I learned about how to file complaints and that there was actually a process for that. And then, unfortunately, just this past April, we received notification from our children's school that the entire school was outside for a fundraising event. They were jump roping to raise money for heart health in the parking lot, and found out that the farmer right across the street was spraying pesticides and herbicides that day. And it drifted onto the students. We got an email that evening from the principal telling us that all of our kids should be sure to take showers that night. And right away, I knew that there was a lot more to this that needed to be done than just put our kids in the shower.
Yeah. Certain things you can shower off, maybe not so much stuff you might have breathed in.
Yeah.
Have you seen health effects from the people who experienced that day at the school?
From what I understand from the IDOA FOIA requests that I got afterwards, there were kids that did have residual effects for a couple of weeks, red eyes, allergies, different things like that. I think one child maybe had some hives breakout, I believe. My daughter didn't really have anything too much the next day, or anything like that. But I think the biggest concern for parents is the long-term effects, because there's so much research about the long-term negative health consequences to being exposed to pesticides and herbicides.
Kim Erndt-Pitcher with the Prairie Rivers Network. Let me come to you now. So tell us, how does pesticide drift happen?
Well, there's two main ways that drift can occur. The first one is what Katie's daughter and so many other of those students that day experienced, and that's primary drift. That's when the particles of the pesticide are blown away from their target site, which is the field, at the time of application, and they're carried in the wind to off-target people, animals, plants, etc. We also see a secondary drift or vapor drift. And that happens when, the applicator, whether they're a golf course or someone applying to a lawn or a grower applying to their fields, they do everything according to the label. But in the right environmental conditions, 1 day, 3 days, 5 days, 7 days, after that, the pesticides can vaporize or volatilize off of plant and soil surfaces into the air and move off target, sometimes really long distances, and cause injury after the fact. And when we're using pesticides at a really massive scale, like thousands of acres or millions of acres, like we do here in the Midwest, that volatilization can really become a problem.
What is your organization, Prairie Rivers, found about the scale of pesticide drift?
So we've been monitoring trees and plants for the past 8 years, looking for the symptoms of off-target herbicide injury in particular, right? So we can witness and observe the symptoms of herbicide injury, but not necessarily fungicides or insecticides. But herbicides leave these telltale signs of curling and cupping that Katie described. Sometimes there's yellowing, we call it chlorosis. And through over the years, there's a real impact on the health of trees, particularly in many of the communities that we've been monitoring. We're seeing dieback, we're seeing death. And these drift events are not just happening once, they're happening multiple times throughout the growing season. And we're seeing this all across the state.
All right, so let me mention again that we did reach out to the Farm Bureau and the Illinois Fertilizer and Chemical Association, as well as BEAR and the National Organization, Trade Association for Pesticide Manufacturers. The last one didn't respond, the others were not available to join us. So, Kim, I'm going to ask you, what is your understanding as to why farmers use pesticides, herbicides, rather than other forms of control for, invasive insects and weeds and things like that?
Well, historically, we did have a much more diversified agricultural system. There were multiple crops being grown over the years, diversified crops. There were years when they would let their fields go fallow. We had livestock on the landscape. And today we are predominantly using, two species here in Illinois of crops, and that's largely soybeans and corn. We have some wheat and some other crops, but in terms of commodity crops, it's largely those two plants. And today they are resistant to herbicides. So that means that these genetically modified seeds are resistant to the use of herbicides over the top of the growing plant. Farmers can spray these pesticides. They will kill the weeds that they don't want, the herbicides, and the plants themselves will be able to thrive and grow. We used to use tillage and crop rotations, which would naturally break up those pest cycles, and we're no longer doing that.
All right, let me remind listeners this is the 21st show. We're talking about pesticide drift today. My guests are Kimmert Pitcher, Director of Ecological Health with the Prairie Rivers Network, and Katie Vandenberg, who is a resident of Tazewell County, Illinois. Has experienced drift on her own property as well as at her daughter's school, filed a complaint with the Department of Agriculture this year, which has resulted in a significant fine for an applicator in the area, although that's being appealed. If you want to join us today, 800-222-9455. That's 800-222-9455. And let's go now to the phones. We have Tom calling in from Rockford. On line one. Tom, I understand you live on a farm that does commodity farming. Do you?
Yes, sir.
Can you speak to the sort of the pro farmer, the benefit side of these products?
I don't. To be candid with you, I have a similar knowledge base to Kim and experience to Kim in listening. While I was going through screening, I heard some of the prior conversation. I was born and raised in Wrigleyville in Chicago, married into a commodity farming family, multi-generational farming family. And just to be clear, the family is definitely engaged in the application of herbicide, but not pesticide. So they're not really treating for insects. but they are certainly treating for weeds. And I've seen it with my own two eyes, the resistance, especially around the perimeter of fields. Definitely agree that the lack of diversification, and I think any farmer with half a brain would agree that it's big ag, big commercial ag, and the regulations that have been created for decades to further cement big ag, frankly, bears space in the industry is really going to be a long-term detriment to our success as a species on this planet, as well as the success of many, many, many different species.
Well, Tom, I really appreciate you calling in to share your perspective this morning. Thank you for that. Let me share a few messages. We asked members of our texting group about this. We heard from Brody in Champaign, who said, terribly depressing to take a spring hike at a forest preserve and see the mangled, dying oaks. You can't escape it at home either. Someone in my neighborhood had their yard sprayed this spring. It wrecked the young oak in their front yard and ate up the broad-leaved plants all through the neighborhood. We also heard from John in Rockford. In our text message, our outgoing text message to our group, we mentioned how spray drift can wilt trees, kill plants, and sicken people. John said, the kind of damage that you allude to is really small potatoes in the world of pesticide farming. Migrant farm workers in this country have for decades suffered from routine exposure to pesticides, and little or nothing has ever been done about it. We also got a voicemail. Let's listen to that.
Hi, this is Evan, Taylorville, and I wanted to chime in on the pesticide drift. To me, it is a problem because there's nothing to keep somebody from applying the pesticides or herbicides on a windy day. And my concern is, especially near the Lincoln Prairie Trail, most of that is agriculture, and there ought to be a pesticide notification application system like California is implementing, or at least these applicators should share that information with the public as soon as they know a field's going to be have an application, so that people using public areas can avoid inhaling chemicals that we know cause cancer. Thank you.
And thank you, Evan, for that message. We appreciate it. Yeah, maybe some sort of red flag system like you have at the beach when there's high waves or something. And just to add a little more context to his message, California did indeed launch a statewide system to show both upcoming and recent pesticide applications. And we are talking about this with Katie Vandenberg, who's experienced this firsthand in Tazewell County, and Kim Ernst-Pitcher with the Prairie Rivers Network. Again, we invited the Farm Bureau, Fertilizer and Chemical Association, as well as Monsanto. The first two didn't have anyone available. The last one referred us to a national association, which hasn't responded yet. Kim, let me come back to you. What do we know and not know about the long-term health effects of this sort of exposure to some of these chemicals?
Well, we're really behind in our understanding of what the long-term health impacts are. All of these pesticides have to go through, studies in order to be approved. However, what we're seeing now is we're in a landscape where they're being combined in tank mixes, multiple pesticides at one time are being sprayed, and then there's exposures occurring and drift events occurring throughout the growing season of multiple pesticides. And so really understanding what the impacts of them are becomes really tricky at a landscape level and, human exposure level. And we have very little data on what that exposure means for the general public.
What sort of measures are there in place right now to deal with drift, kind of regulations?
So pesticides are, every pesticide that you use has a label. The label is the law. And those labels are created through a lengthy process with US EPA. Many states have the ability to add further restrictions to pesticide use in their state. Illinois is one of those, and we've done that. A good example is with the pesticide dicamba. It's known to be volatile. We have dicamba-tolerant soybeans being planted in our state, and we have added extra precautions to the federal label to strengthen those pesticide regulations. And, they're not always effective. Some pesticides, no matter what you do, you can't control the weather. You can't control when they are going to volatilize. And so we just have to keep monitoring, keep an eye out on the efficacy of the laws and the labels that we have, and adapt.
All right, we are going to take a break on the program. When we come back, we will continue talking about pesticide drift with my guests today, who are Kim Pitcher with the Prairie Rivers Network, and Katie Vandenberg, a resident of Tazewell County, who filed a complaint with the Illinois Department of Agriculture about pesticide drift at her daughter's school. We're going to talk about what that process was like when we return. If you want to join us today, 800-222-9455 is the number. 800-222-9455. We will be back after a short break. This is the 21st show. It's the 21st show. I'm Brian Mackey. We're talking today about pesticide drift and the harm that can have on plants, trees, and, of course, people. My guests are Katie Vandenberg, who experienced this firsthand in Tazewell County, and Kim Pitcher with Prairie Rivers Network. Again, we reached out to the Farm Bureau and the Illinois Fertilizer and Chemical Association. Neither had anyone available to join us today. We also contacted Bayer, which owns Monsanto, with products like Roundup and dicamba. They referred us to a national trade association for pesticide manufacturers, which did not respond to our inquiry as we go to air Thursday morning. 800-222-9455 if you want to respond to our call out. Let us know what your experience has been with pesticide drift. 800-222-9455. Katie, I'm going to come back to you. Talk to me about the process of filing a complaint with the state. Was it easy? Was it hard? What happened?
Well, it's easy because I had already done the research and knew what to do. I've had a lot of people reach out to me after this and say that they had no idea that there was even an ability to do this. So I would like to just preface it with that, because I think that's an important thing to note through all of this, is that as long as you know what to do, it's relatively easy. There's a website. It's agr.illinois.gov, where they have a pesticide misuse form, and you can get on there and input the information and download it and email it to them. And that's exactly what I did. So you have to know the location of the incident. It's helpful if you know the name of the applicator. If you don't, that's okay. You need to know approximately where it happened, what time it happened, if you know if it was a commercial person doing it or if it was just an individual. And one of the biggest problems with it, I think, is that you have to have a witness. In our case, it was the principal of the school, because she obviously had noticed what had happened. So I was able to put her down as the witness. So when you ask if it's hard or easy, it's also hard, I would say, to tell on your neighbors. And I think that's a big part of this too, is nobody wants to have to rat somebody out that you maybe know. And in small town America, like we are all living in rural Illinois, in these farming communities, that's unfortunately the case. And that's hard for a lot of people to have to do something like that.
Yeah, I understand. Do I remember correctly from the story you went to high school with the person?
We went to the same high school. We know a lot of the same people. We have a lot of similar acquaintances. I know of him. He's a great guy. And I would hope he would say the same thing about me. And I think what this boils down to is it's not a personal issue. It's a chemical issue, and we're dealing with, like you said, $1 billion industry that's creating these chemicals that are very volatile, and the farming industry has kind of gotten swept up into it, and the general public, like myself, are the ones having to combat it and stand up for ourselves to try to fight against it.
All right, let me read a few more messages from listeners. Sonia in Decatur sent a text, says, "We used to live in a rural area surrounded by fields. When I saw my farmer neighbor spraying, I would employ every sheet in the house and cover my gardens. He told me the spray was perfectly harmless. I was new to rural life. I didn't believe him. If it killed weeds, it could harm us and our food. It's so hard to find organic bread. I know the Roundup Ready seeds are not good for us. The plants uptake this chemical and it ends up in the corn, wheat, and soy. We also heard from Karen and Simpson, who said pesticide drift affects our household from having to run out and grab the clothes drying on the line and rewash them when we hear a spray rig or nowadays a spray drone working the fields in the neighborhood. Says they lost a large shade tree to herbicide drift. I have to research what I plant around the yard to be sure the plants aren't going to die from the drift. And we also heard from William Chris and Barb Reynolds, who talked about their experience. They said, we lost 2 large tulip trees, an oak tree, and a good deal of our garden produce. We currently have 5 oaks and 4 redbuds affected and distorted growth in our vegetable garden. They go on and say, unless the manufacturers of these toxic poisons can be held accountable for the collateral damage to the public, nothing will change. These companies have lobbied the rule makers to see to it that any responsibility for collateral damage is saddled on the end user. It's way past time for agricultural colleges and universities to share the truth about the dangers to the unsuspecting public and to the farmers who seem to get their knowledge of herbicide properties through their trusted sales representative. Thanks to everyone who wrote in. Kim, given everything we've talked about, what sort of changes would you like to see in terms of how we regulate these products?
Oh, that's a whole conversation itself. But I think there's a few good starting points that we can talk about. One of them, it is a notification, particularly to public spaces that, people are outside enjoying during the growing season, whether that's parks, playgrounds, schools. Many of these applications are occurring while school is in session, just like, what happened with Katie and her family. So, a notification that increases communication between applicator and the community that they're applying these pesticides in would be a really great start. It's also a launching pad for building awareness on the issue of drift, having opportunities to have conversations about what symptoms of drift look like, even if you don't get sprayed, in person. You have these injuries that you're noticing on your backyard gardens or your trees, and those are really important to point out and to report to the Department of Agriculture. So it's also a launching pad for that. There's also many discussions occurring in Illinois and other parts of the country about, should we be using these pesticides that are known to volatilize, these ones that we haven't been able to control and just aren't staying put. We're seeing warmer weather throughout the growing season, and that increases the risk of volatilization. And we're going to have those hard conversations and address those issues.
Let's go back to the phones at 800-222-9455. We have Patrick in Westport calling on line 2. Patrick, thanks for calling in.
Hey, thank you very much for calling attention to this. I think a lot of other people, this is a serious problem, not only in Illinois, but across the country. So, and I also want to compliment this program. I'm a first-time caller, long-time listener, and the issues and topics that are brought forth in a fair manner is outstanding. So forgive me for rambling on. I am in the Westport, Illinois, also the Vincennes, Indiana. The communities basically adjoin each other between the Wabash River. And there is a crop dusting service here. I'm not going to name the names or anything, but it's a pretty big outfit. And I've watched this operation. And the spraying, in regards to the drift, the pesticide drift, is just immense. We operate an animal rescue in our community, and that's a major strike against us in this area. But when you try to have a conversation, even a civil conversation about this, especially with farmers, which I know several of them, classified many of them as my friends and so forth in the past, but it's a moot point. You can't even discuss this. And when you watch the aerial application, it is just coating everything, not just the plants, but it's coating all the wildlife. And I think, just as just on the lower end of this, on the scientific, trying to understand this, I think just from a common person standpoint, this is a travesty. And, it's getting everything, not only just the people. And we've got friends that live next to these fields and so forth, since there's just so much deforestation, removal of even the smallest woodlot in order to get that extra acreage out of it, that these animals have nowhere to go at this point. And when the airplane comes over, it's just a blanket spray. And it is a nauseous, toxic spray that, oh, it's safe for humans, it's safe for animals. Well, didn't they say the same thing about Roundup? So again, I just wanted to make that application, or that just that talking point. This is a very good program today, and I'm learning a lot. But I just wanted to share my 2 cents. And again, thank you for taking my call.
Patrick, thanks so much for calling in. Thanks for the kind words. We appreciate it. And thanks for being with us. I also want to hear from Michael, who is calling from Sycamore, Illinois, and has seen drift, I guess, in his neighborhood. Michael, what are you interested in?
Yes, hello. Can you hear me?
I can. Yeah. Please go ahead.
So I appreciate this topic as well, because I wanted to bring up the frustration that you can face when you suspect that drift has affected your life. 2 years ago, I sadly lost my partner to cancer, and her neighbor died of cancer. Yeah, thank you. And her neighbor died of cancer. Her cat died of cancer. And when we moved all of her belongings out of her condo while she was still alive, we found that everything in her house had a sticky, film over it. And we knew that 2 blocks away from us, we were surrounded, her condo development was surrounded by fields. And so we always suspected that there was something from the spray that was being put on there that drifted through her open windows and that. Well, how else would there have been this sticky substance all over it? And but trying to get some answers of is there an uptick of other people outside of just her building who might have had, been exposed and might have had higher cancer rates? Was this a cell on there? And we could not find anybody willing to even talk to us about it. So it's just, I still to this day believe that that's what might have been an underlying cause of her cancer. And it's frustrating not to be able to find anywhere to go to find answers to that. So,
Michael, thanks for calling in and sharing your story. I'm sorry again about your loss. Kim, let me come back to you. So what people are, this has clearly hit a nerve with people. They want to know what they can do themselves. What do you tell them? Somebody like Michael who's trying to figure this out. If it, is this what happened in his life? Kim, are you still with us?
Yes. Sorry about that. So, this conversation, the impacts of pesticides on human health, is really taking off, particularly in Iowa. There's a lot of connections being made to pesticide use, the rates of pesticides being used in different counties, and the instances of cancer. And, correlation isn't always causation, but these conversations are surfacing. And, I think people really should pay attention. If they feel that they've been exposed, they need to report that to the Department of Ag, contact their physician, and, talk to the Department of Health and see if they can, get some more information about pesticide exposures. But there is more literature that's coming out about the widespread use of pesticides and their impacts on humans and ecosystems.
Katie, your story ended up on our radar because of reporting done by the Chicago Tribune on this, and I want to read a quote from that story. This is Jenny Webb, who's president of the Fertilizer and Chemical Association. She said pesticide application decisions in Illinois are made based on field conditions on the day of application, not days in advance. And she also said the changing nature of wind and weather make it impractical to give advance notice. Katie, what do you think of that?
I have a lot that I think about that, but I know we're short on time. So I think what we need to really do is reframe the farming industry as a business. I've been a business owner for 22 years. I've been in the food industry. I'm now a landlord. I'm a divorce coach, and every single business that I am in has regulations that protect the well-being of the public. And I think that I would put that back on her or anybody that were to oppose some regulations. I don't think 24 hours notice is unreasonable. As a landlord, I have to give 24 hours notice before I even walk into somebody's apartment to check on something. And I would ask, is this a matter of inconvenience to the farmers, or is this a matter truly of farmer well-being? Because this is definitely a matter of the well-being of the general public. And because what they are putting down isn't staying put on their private property, it's going everywhere, I think the public has a right to know what's happening, and I don't think 24 hours is unreasonable. And also, if they give notification and the wind speeds change, they don't have to spray. It's not saying, oh, I said I was going to spray, I have to do it, but it's too windy now. That's not the case. They just reschedule it. They re-notify. And so it's a very simple thing to do. I mean, the science behind the weather forecast now is pretty good. And I think 24 hours is enough time to be able to tell if they're going to be able to spray the next day or not, and make a simple phone call, which would have saved everybody all of this grief, not only all the families, but the farmer too. He wouldn't have to be dealing with all this stress and the financial burden of this fine that he's facing now if he had just taken 30 seconds to make a phone call.
A $250,000 fine, as we mentioned earlier, although it's being appealed. Kim, I want to share one more message from a listener. Tony in Champaign says, I hate the idea that we may be getting dosed with harmful chemicals. I've no confidence our government would protect us from bad actors. If it's a choice between a healthy ecosystem and a farmer, I'm voting for the ecosystem every time, end quote. Kim, does it have to be either or? How can we balance the needs of farmers and the health of their neighbors, both flora and fauna, human fauna?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really great point that he makes. I mean, right now we're in an environment where our ecosystem and our property is taking a hit, and our human health is at risk. And so I think that, back to the earlier part of the conversation where we were talking about how we used to diversify our agricultural land, and we would have a variety of crops that would naturally break up those pest cycles. We used light tillage, we used light cultivation. Pesticides were used, but they were largely used early in the season. And there are integrated pest management practices that we can use, bring back to the landscape, that would help us reduce our reliance on pesticides. Right now we're in this pesticide treadmill where we're trying to combat these herbicide-resistant weeds, and we are largely growing, commodity crops that are deeply incentivized. And we need to work together with research universities, with farmers, with the public to find real solutions. There's no silver bullet. It's going to take multiple efforts, and people are going to have to come at this problem from multiple angles. But chemical trespass is unacceptable, and it is very expensive in many ways for people's emotional health, their psychological well-being, as well as the environmental health. There's so many impacts that we don't fully understand and that are poorly studied. But we do know that it's really expensive to take down a dead tree, and that is happening more and more frequently.
One more message from a listener. Jeremy in Fairmount says, herbicides are one of the most important things for no-till agriculture, which keeps your soil in place and stops dust from blowing. Losing these herbicides would make more tillage and more erosion. We're going to have to leave it there. I'm sure we will revisit this conversation in the future. Katie Vandenberg has experienced pesticide drift firsthand in Tazewell County, made her an activist on this issue. Kim Ernst-Pitcher is with the Prairie Rivers Network. Katie and Kim, thanks for being with us today here on the 21st Show.
Thank you so much.
And coming up after the break, we're going to head out to Burning Man in California. This is the 21st Show. Stay with us. It's Nevada. I said California.